I'm live.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm joined this evening by my friend, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, Dee Pierce. Hello,
Happy
Dee.
to be here. Happy to be here and joining your discussions.
Okay, thank you, Dee. Where's the echo coming from?
I don't know. Let me just see if I put this in another.
Okay.
Switch things here. How does this sound? Sound any better?
Well, I'm hearing an echo when I say something, so I'm saying something now.
Okay, so I don't hear an echo.
Yeah, I'm not hearing an echo either. So I guess it's all right.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Let me share this out.
yeah, let me share it out too. Okay, folks, we'll be right back. We're just going to share this out.
Yes, it's very important to share it out.
Yes, it is. Okay, Dee, I guess we're back.
Okay. I'm just sharing it into some groups here.
Okay. I'm going to start with the first of our topics, which is the competency crisis in the West.
Okay.
So I'll share the screen for that one. I'm getting the echo again.
I don't hear you echo. I don't hear an echo when you talk.
Okay. Okay. The competency crisis proliferating the West. This is an article by Alistair Crook on January 20th, 2025. Picked it up at the UN's Review, and that's where we're sharing it from. The quote, strange defeat is that of Europe's, quote, curious, unquote, inability to understand Ukraine or its military mechanics. The essayist and military strategist Aurelian has written a paper entitled The Strange Defeat. The original is in French. The quote, strange defeat, unquote, being that of Europe's curious inability to understand Ukraine or its military mechanics. Aurelian highlights the strange lack of realism by which the West has approached the crisis. Unquote. And the almost pathological dissociation from the real world it displays in its words and actions. Yet even as the situation deteriorates and the Russian forces advanced everywhere, there's no sign that the West is becoming more reality-based in its understanding and it's very likely that it will continue to live in its alternative construction of reality until it is forcibly expelled. The writer continues in some detail, omitted here, to explain why NATO has no strategy for Ukraine and no real operational plan. And quote again, it is only a series of ad hoc initiatives linked together by vague aspirations that have no connection with real life, plus the hope that, quote, something beneficial will occur, unquote. Our current Western political leaders have never had to develop such skills. Yet it is actually worse than that. Not having developed these skills, not having advisors who have developed them, they cannot really understand what the Russians are doing, how and why they are doing it. Western leaders are like spectators who do not know the rules of chess or Go and are trying to figure out who is winning, quote unquote. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, to put our confusion about what's happening in Ukraine. What exactly was their goal? Now, responses such as, quote, to send a message to Putin, unquote, quote, complicate Russian logistics, unquote, or, quote, improve morale at home, unquote, are no longer allowed. What I want to know is what is expected in concrete terms. What are the tangible results of their messaging, quote unquote? Can they guarantee that it will be understood? Have you anticipated the possible reactions of the Russians? And what will you do then, unquote? The essential problem, Aurelian bluntly concludes, is that, quote, our political classes and their parasites have no idea how to deal with such crises or even how to understand them. The war in Ukraine involves forces that are orders of magnitude larger than any Western nation has deployed on operations since 1945. Instead of real strategic objectives, they have only slogans and fanciful proposals, unquote. Coldly put, says Crook, the author explains that for complex reasons connected with the nature of Western modernity, the liberal elite simply are not competent or professional in matters of security, and they do not understand its nature. U.S. cultural critic Walter Kern makes rather similar claims in a very different yet related context. California fires in America's competency crisis. Los Angeles is in flames. Quote, Los Angeles is in flames. Yet California's leaders seem helpless, unmasking a generation of public investment in non-essential services that leaves the authorities floundering amidst the predicted occurrence of the fires, unquote. On a Joe Rogan podcast earlier this month, a firefighter goes, quote, it's just going to be the right wind and fire's going to start in the right place and it's going to burn through LA all the way to the ocean. And there's not a effing thing we can do about it, unquote. Kern observes, quote, this isn't the first fire or set of fires in the area of Malibu. Just a few years ago, there were big fires. There always are. They're inevitable. But having built this giant city in this place with this vulnerability, there are measures that can be taken to contain and fend off the worst, unquote. Quote again, to fob it off on climate change, as I say, is a wonderful thing to tell yourself, but none of this started yesterday. My only point is this. Has it done everything it can to prepare for an inevitable, unavoidable situation that perhaps in scale differs from the past, but certainly not in kind? Are its leaders up to the job? There's not a lot of sign that they are. They haven't been able to deal with things like, excuse me, homelessness without fires. So the question of whether all those things have been done, whether they've been done well, whether there was adequate water and fire hydrants, whether they were working at all, things like that, and whether the fire department was properly trained or properly staffed, all those questions are going to arise, unquote. And as far as the competency crisis goes, I think that there will be ample material to portray this as aggravated by incompetence. California is a state that's become notorious for spending a lot of money on things that don't work, on high-speed rail lines that never are constructed, on all sorts of construction projects and infrastructure projects that never come to pass. And in that context, I think this will be devastating to the power structure of California, unquote. In a larger sense, though, it's going to remind people that a politics that has for years now been about language and philosophical constructs such as equity and so on is going to be seen as having failed in the most essential way to protect people. And that these people are powerful and influential and privileged is going to make that happen faster in a more prominent fashion, unquote. To which his colleague, journalist Matt Taibbi, responds, quote, but pulling back in a broader sense, we do have a crisis of competency in this country. It has had a huge impact on American politics, unquote. Kern, quote, speaking of Americans, they're going to want less concern for the philosophical or even long-term political questions of equity and so on, I predict. And they're going to want to lay in a minimum expectation of competence in natural disasters. Notice this is a time when the priorities shift, and I think that big change is coming, big change, because we look like we've been dealing with luxury problems, and we've certainly been dealing with other countries' problems, Ukraine or whoever it might be, with massive funding. There are people in North California right now still recovering from a flood and having a very difficult time as winter comes, which it doesn't in LA in the same way, or as winter consolidates itself, I guess, unquote. Quote again. So looking forward, it's not a question of blame. It's what are people going to want? What are people going to value? What are they going to prize? Are their priorities going to shift? I think they will shift big time. Los Angeles will be a touchstone, and it will be a touchstone for a new approach to government, unquote. So we have this, says Alistair, quote, divorce from reality, unquote, and consequent, quote, competency crisis, unquote, whether in California, Ukraine, or Europe. Where lies the roots to this particular malaise? U.S. writer David Samuels believes this to be the answer. In his last days, this is a quote, in his last days of office, President Barack Obama made the decision to set the country on a new course. On December 23, 2016, he signed into law the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which used the language of defending the homeland to launch an open-ended, offensive information war, a war that fused the security infrastructure with the social media platforms, where the war supposedly was being fought. However, collapse of the 20th century media pyramid and its rapid replacement by monopoly social media platforms had made it possible for the Obama White House to sell policy and reconfigure social attitudes and premises in an entirely new way. During the Trump years, Obama used those tools of the digital age to craft an entirely new type of power center for himself, one that revolved around his unique position as the titular, though pointedly never named head of a Democratic Party, which he succeeded in refashioning in his own image, Samuels writes. Quote, the permission structure, unquote, machine that Barack Obama and David Axelrod, a highly successful Chicago political consultant, built to replace the Democratic Party was in its essence a device for getting people to act against their beliefs by substituting new and better beliefs through the top-down controlled and leveraged application of social pressure, effectively turning Axelrod's construct into an omnipotent thought machine, Samuel suggests. Quote, the term, quote, echo chambers, unquote, describes the process by which the White House and its wider penumbra of think tanks and NGOs deliberately created an entirely new class of experts who mutually credentialed each other on social media in order to advance assertions that would formerly have been seen as marginal or not credible. The aim was for a platform of aides armed with laptops or smartphones to run with the latest inspired party meme and to immediately repeat and repeat it across platforms, giving the appearance of an overwhelming tide of consensus filling the country, thus giving people the, quote, permission structure, unquote, of apparent wide public assent to believe propositions that formerly they would never have supported. Excuse me. Quote, where this analysis went wrong is the same place that the Obama team's analysis of Trump went wrong. The wizards of the permission structure machine had become captives of the machinery that they built. The result was a fast-moving mirror world that would generate the velocity required to change the appearance of what people believed overnight. Sorry, I lost my place for a moment. Quote, where this analysis went wrong is the same place that the Obama team's analysis of Trump went wrong. The wizards of the permission structure machine had become captives of the machinery that they built. The result was a fast-moving mirror world that could generate the velocity required to change the appearance of, quote, what people believe, unquote, overnight. The newly minted digital variant of, quote, public opinion, unquote, was rooted in the algorithms that determine how fads spread on social media, in which mass multiplied by speed equals momentum, speed being the key variable. Quote again, at every turn over the next 4 years, it was like a fever was spreading, and no one was immune. Spouses, children, colleagues, and supervisors at work began reciting with the force of true believers slogans they had only learned last week. It was the entirety of this apparatus, not just the ability to fashion clever or impactful tweets, that constituted the party's new form of power. In the end, however, the fever broke. And now, going on with Alistair himself, the credibility of elites imploded. Samuel's account amounts to a stark warning of the danger associated with distance opening up between an underlying reality and an invented reality that could be successfully messaged and managed from the White House. This possibility opened the door to a new potential for a large-scale disaster, like the war in Iraq, unquote, Samuels suggests. Samuels does not specifically mention Ukraine, although this is implied throughout the argument. This, both the Obama tale as told by David Samuels and Walter Kearns' story of California, augment Aurelian's point about Ukraine and European military incompetence and the lack of professionalism on the field. It is one of allowing a schism to open up between a contrived narrative and reality. Quote, which, unquote, Samuels warns, is, quote again, is to say that with enough money, operatives could create and operationalize mutually reinforcing networks of activists and experts to validate a messaging arc that would short-circuit traditional methods of validation and analysis and lead unwary actors and audience members alike to believe that things that they had never believed or ever heard of before were in fact not only plausible, but already widely accepted within their own specific peer groups. It constitutes the path to disaster, even risking nuclear disaster in the case of the Ukraine conflict. Will the competency crisis reaching across such varied terrain trigger a rethink, as Walter Kern, a writer on cultural change, insists? And that question isn't answered by Judge Napolitano, but evidently he does think that the competency crisis reaching across such varied terrain trigger a rethink on culture change. So that's a compelling piece of reasoning, I think, on Alistair Crook's part, and it helps to explain why the West cannot see that Ukraine has lost. They just can't see it, even though it's as plain as the nose on your face. And Friar Steve is here. Hello, Friar Steve. Evelina's here too. Friar Steve says, U.S. President Donald Trump has made bold claims about the war in Ukraine, saying that approximately 1 million Russian soldiers. This info has been out for some time. Hi all. Yes, he made a bold claim there, which is in fact totally untrue. 1 million Ukrainian soldiers have died, not 1 million Russian soldiers. Evelina says, hi all. Friar Steve says, Finland, Sweden, Poland, and UK have taken the lead in supporting Ukraine. They know they are next. And Friar Steve greets Eve. And Friar Steve says, LA will be fine. They don't look fine right now, Friar Steve. Friar Steve says, Joe Rogan has become platform for the information. What information? Correction, Joe Rogan's platform has become a channel for misinformation. Don't listen to Joe Rogan. Oh, okay. Friar Steve says, is the reason insurance companies stopped insurance for fires on the West Coast and water damage in Florida because of climate change. Yeah, the reason is those things occur so frequently they can't make money. Frosty says California will keep some leaders when the Olympics comes around. All this will be remembered because California will thrive. Governor Gavin and Mayor Bass will unite California. Fry Steve says, this guy in the article will be proven wrong. Wait until the Olympics. I don't know if I'll be around for that Olympics, but I will try and wait. I think there is a competency crisis here in the West. Farsty says, hello, Doc, I am back. I noticed, Steve. Good to see you back. So, let's go on from there to our next piece. Should I put it up for you, Dee?
Please.
Yes, please. I shall.
Okay, here we go. To the UNS review. Bibi assures Israelis that
And
the
we should say before we start, this is by Mike Whitney,
Okay.
January
Stated.
2025.
Yes. Bibi assures Israelis that the genocide will resume after 42 days. Let 33 of my people go. Everything we attempt to do has failed. We could not destroy Hamas or the Palestinians. We are powerless in preventing the Syrian revolution. We visited Nasrallah, but failed to destroy Hezbollah. We most certainly did not destroy the Houthis. We lost. Ori Goldberg. On one hand, the ceasefire agreement appears to be the worst deal that Hamas could have made. But on the other hand, the agreement helps to show that after 16 months of non-stop slaughter and destruction, Israel has failed to achieve any of its strategic objectives, nor has it dampened the spirits of the indomitable Palestinians. On top of that, Israel has exposed itself as a thoroughly immoral rogue regime without a trace of humanity. This is how Abdel Jawad Omar summed it up at Mondo Weiss. The war has laid bare Israel's racialized supremacy, its monstrous capacity for destruction, and its deeply entangled web of ideological, psychic, and political investments in erasure and domination. This is not merely a conflict of arms, but a revelation of the structure that remains and perpetuates the machinery of violence. The war has exposed the exceptionalism surrounding Israel, not only in granting the state impunity, not only in silencing and suppressing dissent across Europe and North America, not only within academic institutions or mainstream media, but in its brazen ability to commit crimes live on air.
Well, that was a beautiful piece of writing there.
Yes, it is. Horrific, and it's the truth what he said.
Yes.
For Palestinians, this capacity is viewed through a bitter lens. It is seen as an Israeli strength. After all, Israel is presented as a state that can get away with anything, a reality as oppressive as the violence itself. Yet, it is also this very exceptionalism, this enforced limit on discourse, that calls attention to Israel's unmasking as a Jewish supremacist and settler colonial state.
Yes, well
God,
put.
yes, a fascist state.
That too.
Mhm. Gaza ceasefire reveals Israel's fragility and the transformative power of resistance. Still, even though Israel's public image has been forever tarnished, the present agreement does not bode well for the Palestinians either. First of all, there is no incentive for Israel to implement all three phases of the deal. Once the 33 Israeli hostages are returned, Netanyahu can simply terminate the agreement and resume the onslaught, which is precisely what his supporters expect him to do. Take a look at this clip. And this is Haaretz.
Yes.
But a different version of the deal appears in statements and briefings published by Netanyahu's office and his media loyalist. In this version, phase 2 of the deal is a dead letter, and Israel is hell-bent on renewing the war after the completion of phase 1, even at the cost of sacrificing its male hostages. Don't take my word for it. Trust Netanyahu's own aides and confidants, like his chief of staff, Yossi Fuchs, who wrote on Wednesday that the deal, quote, includes the option to resume the fighting at the end of phase 1 if the negotiations over phase 2 don't develop in a manner that promises the fulfillment of the war's goal. Military and civil annihilation of Hamas and a release of all hostages.
We can be pretty sure the negotiations of phase 2 are not going to provide for military and civil annihilation of Hamas and a release of all hostages. So if that's the hope of the Israelis, it's just not going to happen.
Well, the one thing too, Netanyahu told Smotrich that if he would just go along, that he would let him escalate the attacks in the West Bank.
Yes.
I mean, just sick minds.
Yes.
Here's more on the same. Yeah, here's more on the same topic from Trump's hawkish national security advisor, Mike Waltz. We've been clear that Gaza has to be fully demilitarized. Hamas has to be destroyed to the point that it cannot reconstitute, and that Israel has the right to fully protect itself. But it shows Gaza, the people of Gaza, have no right to defend themselves. No military, no weapons, nothing. So when all the abuse Israel does to them, it's allowed, and they have no way to defend themselves. All of these objectives are still very much in place. Hamas cannot have a role in governing Gaza. There are hostage-taking, murderous torturers that should never have a role in governing. Oh, that is a mouthful.
Yeah,
We'll never get
that is definitely a mouthful. Why don't they look in the mirror?
exactly. They're talking about themselves.
What are they doing? Hostage taking. They're murderous. They're torturers. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people, okay, in the Israeli prison camps. People picked up off the street.
I know, it's just mind-boggling how they don't really look in the mirror at themselves.
Yes.
We'll never get to a better future until we carve out this cancer. Israel's the cancer. It's really sad. The Zionists that are in power there,
You
you
betcha.
know, and that's why a lot of secular people left.
Yeah.
And here's how Uber Zionist Ben Shapiro explains it on X. Notes on the hostage deal. It is a hostage deal, not an end of war deal. Phase 1 allows for the release of 33 hostages. It is not clear how many are alive, but some reports suggest 23. Again, the ceasefire is almost certainly temporary. It is not a permanent end to the war. Phase 2 is, in my opinion, highly unlikely ever to materialize given how many hostages Hamas retains and given that Hamas will never disarm or agree to exile. The deal does not force Israel to alter deployment along the Philadelphia corridor, border between Gaza and Egypt. And so, what does all this mean? First, that some hostages will come home alive. This is an unmitigated good. It would have been excellent to get more hostages out, but that option was presumably unavailable, given Hamas's radical intransigence and the waning health of many of the hostages. The problem has always been Israel.
It has.
That's been the problem.
They've been the ones who have been intransigent, actually, from the beginning. Every time a deal is made, they break that deal.
Exactly.
They never fulfill a deal.
Right.
And they never withdraw from their goal of wanting to genocide the Palestinians.
And they see nothing wrong with that.
Yes, they are the ones who are intransigent and sticking to that horrible goal, absolutely opposed to international law and international opinion.
Mhm. Second, that the war will continue until Hamas has no control over Gaza. Trump's nominees have said as much, so has the Israeli government. So actually, the people there are just to live there and daily deal with the abuses coming from Israel with nobody there to stand by them or protect them or anything else.
That's what the Israelis want.
Mhm. The Trump team squared this circle. The Biden team undoubtedly wanted a permanent end to the conflict as a condition of a hostage release. What? The Biden team undoubtedly wanted a permanent end to this.
Yeah, I don't believe that. Do you? I
No, no, not at
don't
all.
believe that at all.
Team Trump presumably told Hamas that wasn't going to happen and that this was the best deal they were likely to get.
Right. This is a tweet from Ben Shapiro,
He's nuts.
who's an extremely pro-Israel nutcase.
Yeah.
Yes, and a rabid Zionist. There he is,
Oh, yeah. He's just evil.
Ben Shapiro, New Line Cinema.
So, in Shapiro's estimation, Trump gave more away to Netanyahu than even Biden. Biden wanted a permanent end to the conflict as a condition of hostage release, whereas Trump rejected that demand. This suggests that Trump is not going to use the leverage of his office to stop Israel's year-and-a-half long killing spree.
Yeah, well, he's already stopped it for at least a few days.
Yes,
So we got to give him credit for that.
right. In fact, Netanyahu admitted as much in a public statement delivered just hours before the ceasefire began. Here's what he said. Out of this terrible disaster, yeah, he's the one that, when it comes to a terrible disaster, the tremendous strength of the Israeli people's spirit was revealed, as was the supreme heroism of our soldiers, and it's this that leads us with a fierce determination to achieve all the goals of the war, to return to say to return all our hostages. It's crazy because for him, that if it was up to him, they'd all be dead.
And many of them have been killed as a result of Netanyahu's actions.
Right. To eliminate Hamas's governing capabilities and to ensure that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to our country. As soon as he was elected, President-elect Donald Trump mobilized himself to free the hostages. He spoke to me on Wednesday evening. He welcomed the agreement and he rightly emphasized that the first phase of the agreement is a temporary ceasefire. That's what he said, a quote, temporary ceasefire. Netanyahu emphasized, stating that both Trump and Biden have given full backing to Israel's right to resuming the war. It's just evil, so evil. If Israel concludes that the negotiations of the deal's second phase are futile, Israel, they. I also appreciate President Trump's decision to lift all remaining restrictions on the supply of essential weapons and ammunition to the state of Israel. Why would Netanyahu want to emphasize the quote temporary nature of the ceasefire if he was seriously committed to ending the hostilities?
Why, indeed.
Yeah, he's a maniac. He wouldn't. He'd make every effort to end the dispute through diplomacy and negotiations, which is a literal meaning of the term ceasefire. Definition: a temporary suspension of fighting, typically one during which peace talks take place. But the present ceasefire bears no resemblance to the dictionary definition. There are no peace talks scheduled, nor will there be, which means that Israel is simply using the current agreement to get its hostages back without giving up anything in return. The return of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners to the Gaza war zone, where food, water, and basic security are no longer available, does not appear to be a fair trade off. But there's more going on here than meets the eye. Even so, we should not ignore Trump's decision to lift all remaining restrictions on the supply of essential weapons and ammunition to the state of Israel. What does that mean? It means that Trump is even more eager than Biden to provide Israel with the bombs and lethal weaponry they need to kill more women and children in Gaza. What else could it mean? Well, it means too that he has bombing going all over in the Middle East, and also he's also wants to get started with Iran.
Yes, it does.
Keep in mind, Trump's supporters still believe they elected a non-interventionist who wants to end America's destructive foreign wars, and and yet that clearly is not the case. Trump is not only the most Zionist president in U.S. history. Well, he'd have to argue with Biden about that because Biden thinks he's the most. He was the most. He's already given Netanyahu a green light to, quote, finish the job in Gaza and the West Bank, just as he is already on record saying that Israel should strike nuclear sites in Iran. Biden was in sync with all this.
He was.
He had he has repeatedly showed his willingness to provide unconditional support for his constituents in Israel, who, by the way, contributed $100 million to his presidential campaign. How much of that money will be spent promoting America's interest? It doesn't matter who's in power. I don't think our interests really matter.
Well, we need to make them matter, of course.
Exactly. Not a dime, I'd wager. Here's more on Trump's role in the ongoing genocide from Mondoweiss. For Donald Trump, the agreement is less a diplomatic breakthrough than a carefully wrapped narrative gift. It hands him a clean storyline of triumph, the return of Israeli captives, the cessation of conflict, crafted perfectly to match his populist brand of politics. It slots seamlessly into the mythology of his presidency, the consummate deal maker, the leader who succeeds where others fail, the disruptor who shakes the foundation of entrenched stalemates and deadly status quos. Gaza ceasefire reveals Israel's fragility and the transformative power of resistance. Mondo Weiss.
Yes.
Trump knows what is expected of him, and he will undoubtedly comply. Otherwise, Bibi's allies on Capitol Hill will launch a third impeachment that will either terminate his presidency or derail his ambitious political agenda. In any event, it will be very hard to prevent the resumption of hostilities in Gaza, mainly because key players in the current government are fully committed to the eradication of the native population. For example, Israeli Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich stated, "I will bring down the government if it does not return to fighting in a way that leads us taking over the entire Gaza Strip and governing it. Israel must occupy Gaza and create a temporary military government because there is no other way to defeat Hamas. If I were the prime minister, I would tell the chief of staff, this is my policy. If you don't execute it, go home," Smotrich says on the Times of Israel.
No, so didn't the chief of staff uh, hand in his resignation
Yes.
effective March 25th?
And you know something? When you read this, and it talks about all this power and the power over Washington, no matter who's in the presidency, it's like it kind of says that we are occupied. We're occupied by Israel.
Yes. Yes, there's no doubt about it.
Hmm.
And they want to continue the occupation.
What we're trying to show is that a resumption of the killing and destruction is near certainly. But that doesn't mean that the ceasefire isn't a significant victory for the Palestinians. It is, in my honest opinion. Netanyahu never would have agreed to the truce had he anticipated the triumphalist celebrations that have taken place in Gaza, along with the outpouring of sympathy and support from people around the world. Free at last, free at last.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
Free at last.
Israeli forces stormed the home of Palestinian hostage Ziana Barber in Silwan, warning her family against celebrating her expected release on Sunday, enforcing Israel's policy to suppress any, quote, expression of joy within Israeli territory. They're psychopaths.
I know, they're psychopaths.
The video emerging from the war zone of abused women and children, even a 4-year-old, for God's sakes, being released by heavily armed Israeli goons, is a propaganda coup that Bibi never expected. The imagery goes way beyond the confines of a territorial dispute that has persisted for more than 7 decades and speaks directly to the human spirit that seeks liberation, whatever the cost. And the Palestinians have certainly paid that cost in full. Alon Mizrahi summed it up best in a comment he posted on X. What is getting clearer at this unique moment is that Hamas, a small Palestinian movement, defeated not only Israel, but the entire West, all of it. It won on the battlefield and it won in the public opinion. It managed to make spectacular use of its reading of Israeli mentality and it employed every asset it had with extreme efficiency and won hearts for the Palestinian cause the world over. It has not been destroyed or dismantled. It kept virtually every captive it took 6 months ago. It yielded to no pressure. It remains functional and lethal, and it besieged and bombed to oblivion tiny strip it landed. If land, oh, I can't see that. Oblivion tiny strip of land. History will judge the last 6 months as one of the most genius and unbelievable achievements in all military history. This is beyond unfathomable. By waging this war this way, by not thinking or feeling, Israel made Hamas a legend of resistance that will live in cultural memories for ages. No one believed they could pull this off, but they did. And they changed history forever. Palestine is never returning to the shadow again. Hamas won. Allah Mirahi, Jewish Arab who no longer lives in Israel. Beautifully stated. Bravo, Alan.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So it remains to be seen what the political impact will be inside of Israel of this.
Mm.
And it remains to be seen whether Trump is really going to stand back and let them continue the genocide. If he's looking for that deal with Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia insists on a Palestinian state, then Trump is going to have to make the Israelis go through with all three phases of this ceasefire.
Yes. They're
So,
gonna.
okay, right now, most commentary is against this thought. There was commentary by uh, on Danny Haifong's program by Pep Escobar today, and he seems to think that Trump can somehow get his deal with the Saudis done, and that this can happen without the Saudis being successful, okay, in getting an independent Gaza, okay, as part of the deal. I think Scott Ritter agrees with this. I think most commentators think that the Saudis are going to fold and that Trump and the Israelis will get their way. I have to say, I'm not so sure. I am so sure. What's that sound in the background? Is it Colby?
Yeah, dog snoring near me.
Colby is snoring.
Yes.
Okay, let's look at some more comments.
Okay, I'll put the mute on for now.
We weren't listening to Ben Shapiro. We're not listening to Joe Rogan. We're listening to Mike Whitney. Forrest says, exactly, Bibi knows Trump has his back. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but we're going to see. They got rid of the Biden administration to get full approval for removing Arab populations from Gaza. Trump is what Bibi needed. This ends badly for the 2.5 billion in Gaza. Well, you're assuming the Israelis can beat them with our help, with any help that Trump chooses to give them. I'm not so sure. They're still standing. We see that they're still standing. Many people think that their capabilities are not just intact, but greater than when they started. Also, Hezbollah has begun to attack Israel again. They have come back. That ceasefire is now over. I don't know if it's officially over, but both sides are firing at each other, so I think that's over as well. Of course, the Houthis have not stopped firing at the Israelis. I think the Israelis are still in a lot of very hot water. I hope you are listening to what Trump is saying that he is going to do to Gaza. I'm listening to everything Trump is saying, but of course, you can't always take what Trump is saying as gospel. Sometimes he does it, sometimes he doesn't. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody. Friar Steve says, the male Israelis remaining out, soldiers, they know they're going to die. There are many of them who are deserting in droves because they don't want to die. We're seeing that. That's evidently close. Friar Steve says, hello, fellow Steve. And Friar Steve says, when the Saudis take over Gaza, they will not allow Hamas to exist either. But Fatah should remain as the only legitimate authority in Gaza. Who wants Fatah? Nobody wants Fatah. I hope they get to remain. But to think that letting Hamas continue, don't see it as being healthy for the population of 2.5 million in Gaza. It may not be healthy, but judging from the celebrations, the 2.3 million still in Gaza seem to want Hamas to continue as their rulers. There's a lot of popular support for them in any case that was demonstrated during the ceasefire. Friar Steve says, Ben Shapiro isn't an expert on anything, unsure why you're listening to him or Joe Rogan. We're not listening to him. Or we're listening to him because we want people to see the error of their ways. Friar Steve says, Biden had a ceasefire. Trump will end the ceasefire the second Bibi tells him to. Maybe. But it depends on how badly he wants that Saudi deal. Trump just lifted restrictions on weapons to Israel. Unsure why you thought Trump would be an ally to Gaza. I don't think he's going to be an ally to Gaza. I think he's going to stop Israel because he wants to make a deal with the Saudis. Or stop weapons to Israel. Again, it's because he wants to make a deal with the Saudis, and I think the Saudis eventually are going to insist on that. This Trump will actually complete this genocide by removing Arabs from Gaza and replacing them with settlers. Well, I don't think that's going to be easy. The reason why I don't think it's going to be easy is because the Iranians still have the capability to attack Israel. And they're not going to stand by when further genocide is being practiced. Nor will the Houthis stand by, nor will Hezbollah stand by. The axis of resistance is still alive and well. It's not going anywhere. Trump supporters are cute. Are cooked. They'll believe whatever Trump says. These are things I told you before, but Doc, you laughed at me. Trump will bomb Iran and resettle Gaza. You will no longer have Biden to kick around. No, I'll have Trump to kick around. Friar Steve says, good article. Friar Steve says, the only way to save Gaza is if people in the U.S. support progressive movements in Israel and hope to vote to change, because there's no hope here for 4 more years. Well, I think there's hope here, and the reason why I think there's hope here is I don't think Trump is going to have a lot of patience for failure. And what he's facing in Israel is more and more failure unless he engages there with American troops. And he doesn't want to do that. That's not what he was elected to do. He won't be seen as the peacemaker if he does that. But more importantly, if he engages hundreds of thousands of our troops there, how's he going to maintain security at home? He's not going to be free just to do that. He'll be free to deliver more arms, of course, within the capabilities of the U.S. to produce them. But we already see that's not nearly the kind of capability the Russians have to supply arms. If the Russians settle with the Ukrainians in the short run, then that's going to free them up to turn to supporting their ally in West Asia, specifically Iran. Friar Steve says, remember George Bush Sr. opposed settlements in the Golan Heights? That's why Israeli lobby helped to push him out of office for Clinton. Well, it helped to push him out of office for Obama, who, of course, made Clinton his Secretary of State. It was Clinton who planned to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Oh, I'm sorry, he's talking George Bush Sr. here. I see. So that's right, Steve. That's what happened. Friar Steve. Friar Steve says the U.S. Special Ops and military predicted this outcome years ago. They did analysis and warned Israel. Israel didn't take it seriously. Friar Steve says, got it, Doc. The Earl of Lurie says, hi, Steve. Which Steve? Steve Wolfbrandt or Friar Steve? Friar Steve says, remember what happened in 2005 in Gaza? Yeah, I remember Hamas was elected in Gaza. I believe in the election of 2005. I also remember that the Israeli troops were pushed out of Gaza in 2004. Doc Trump is already talking about putting U.S. troops in Gaza. Remember, he wants to be a war president. He's trying to start a war with the cartel. Trump is not a peacemaker. Well, he may be trying to start a war, but we got a very small army. And he wants to do things in Latin America also. If he ends up committing a couple of 100,000 of our troops to Gaza, he's going to get us into a quagmire. And it's not a quagmire we can cope with. And moreover, the Houthis will attack American shipping and American attempts to get our troops there, as will Hezbollah and as will the Iranians. How are they going to get to Israel in the first place? So, having said that, let us move along to our next piece, which is called the Pistachio Pact. I thought that was a most inventive title. This piece is by John Helmer. It's called the Pistachio Pact. It's for Munns, of course. Is the Russian-Iranian strategic agreement the nut or the shell? An interesting question. Is it the nut in a real game or the shell in a shell game? Right? Sorry, I scrolled that too fast. Got the wrong thing. So here we go. There was a time when Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, that is a mouthful, was president of Iran from 1989 to 97. And he dispatched from his personal office secret intelligence gatherers to Moscow. That was during the Yeltsin administration, when there was no love lost for Iran inside the Kremlin wall. So Rafsanjani's advisors came under cover of merchants selling the pistachios of which Iran is the world's largest and best producer. I remember meeting them at the old Peking Hotel. They were good listeners. I don't recall their saying anything except to ask questions. To our meetings, they brought presentation boxes of finely roasted pistachios. Oh, wonderful. From Rafsanjani's men in those days, I learned that the best way of understanding what Iranians are thinking about the Kremlin is not to ask questions, which they invariably evade and obfuscate and answer. It's in the questions they ask that the clues will be found to Iran's objectives, priorities, and also their uncertainties and their vulnerabilities. At the conclusion of the new president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian's meetings with President Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin on Friday, there was a brief, carefully staged exchange of questions and answers between the presidents and the press. 2 Iranian questions, 2 Russian ones, just 20 minutes were allowed. The Iranian question started from the obvious fact that both Iran and Russia are presently defending themselves from the long U.S. war to destroy them both. Through Israel for Israel, through the Ukraine for Russia. The Iran reporters asked 2 questions, making the same point about the present war. What will happen in the future with the current agreement? What will be the policy of the 2 countries regarding the international agenda, as well as regional cooperation, especially in our region? How can all this be translated into practice? President Putin avoided speaking of the war. The Russian reporters followed suit. Interfax asked about the gas business. Izvestia sidestepped with a fatuity. Quote, with such constant turbulence in the same Middle East, how can the balance of power be maintained, unquote. Pezeshkian was more explicit than Putin. You see in what is taking place in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza Strip that the bloodshed is endless. You will have seen this with your own eyes. These double standards are intolerable to us. Today's agreements ensure that the unipolar world will no longer dictate our course. No double standards can govern the world. Vote again. When discussing recent developments in Syria, unquote, Putin said, quote, we emphasize that Russia remains committed to comprehensive settlement in that country based on respect for its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Russians will definitely go there. We stand ready to continue providing the Syrian people with the necessary support for stabilizing the situation, to offer urgent humanitarian aid, and to start full-scale post-conflict reconstruction. We sincerely wish that the Syrian people will successfully overcome all the emerging challenges posed by the current transition period. More concrete answers are to be found in the 47 articles of the Pact, which the 2 presidents had just signed, titled the, quote, Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnerships between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation. 3 originals were signed in Russian, Persian, and English. Exceptionally, on its last line, the Pact declares that all, quote, that all texts are equally authentic, unquote, but that, quote, in case of any disagreement in interpretation or implementation of this treaty, the English text shall be used, unquote. No historical precedent can be found in which 2 allied states have agreed with each other to apply in this way the language of their common enemy. In the English version of the new treaty, it is also evident how the Russians and Iranians have left out what they failed to agree to say or do towards that enemy. Read carefully. Just 6 weeks after the 2 presidents did not agree on military cooperation to stop the Turkish, Israeli, and American invasions of Syria in this partition, this looks to one military observer as a declaration of maybe we promise to be nice to each other when possible, perhaps. For the record of Putin's disagreements with President Ibrahim Raisi, Pezeshkian's predecessor on Israel war against the Palestinians, and attacks on Iranian targets in Syria. Read this report, and in this one, he links to 2 reports. And then he says, here is the text of the new agreement in full and in English from the Iranian government. The Kremlin publication of the text in Russian can be read here, and he links to that. So he links to the full text of the agreement. So we can study that if we wish to. And he goes on. The terms, quote, war, unquote, unquote, armed invasion, unquote, and the, quote, attack, unquote, are not mentioned. This is in contrast to Articles 3 and 4 of the Russia Democratic People's Republic of Korea, quote, Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which was signed by Putin with Chairman Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang on June 19th last year. In the Korean-Russian Pact, Article 3 provides that, quote, in case a direct threat of armed invasion is created, the two sides shall immediately operate the channel of bilateral negotiations for the purpose of adjusting their stances and discussing feasible practical measures. Article 4 of the Korean-Russian Pact is more explicit. In case one of the two sides is put in a state of war by an armed invasion, the other side shall provide military and other assistance with all means in its possession without delay. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty explicit and not something the Russians gave to the Iranians. Left, President Putin and President Raisi in Moscow on December 23rd, 2023, and right, Putin and President Pistachio in Moscow on January 17th, 2025. And there is Putin with DPRK President Kim Jong-un at their treaty signing in Pyongyang, June 19th, 2024. The operative military provisions of the new Iran Pact are in Article 4, quote, in order to enhance national security and confront common threats, the intelligence and security agencies of the contracting parties shall exchange information and experience and increase the level of their cooperation. 2, the intelligence and security agencies of the contracting parties shall operate within the framework of separate agreements. The term cooperate and cooperation appears 71 times in the treaty text. This is the dominant concept of the agreement. Quote, information, unquote, comes next with 23 mentions, security third at 21. The mentions of military are 12. Quote, trade, unquote, and quote, economic ties, unquote, trail far behind. The vagueness of the cooperation trope is the reason the Iranian reporters asked at the Kremlin press conference what it means in practical terms. Putin's response avoided security, defense, warfighting. Instead, he repeated the pact says for, quote, extra conditions, basic additional conditions to promote change in economic ties. To put it in plain terms, we need less red tape and more concrete action, unquote. Pistachio added the war sensitivity, quote, this, of course, aligns with our shared policy of ensuring regional security and opposing the unipolar world. We are confident that in our region we can cooperate without external influences or involvement from outlying players. Article 3, Section 3 of the treaty provides an unusual disclaimer. In the event that either contracting party is subject to aggression, the other contracting party shall not provide any military or other assistance to the aggressor which would contribute to the continued aggression, and shall help to ensure that differences that have arisen are settled on the basis of the UN Charter and other applicable rules of international law. The Iranians believe that Russian policy in Syria not to operate its air defense systems against Israeli air attacks, nor to protect Syrian territory. The Syrian armed forces and Iranian commanders' units and military equipment in Syria from Israeli bombing and missiles has been tacit Russian encouragement to the Israelis to attack, and thus a violation of the provision which has just been signed. In recent remarks by Brigadier General Behruz Esbati, right, of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, he says so explicitly. And there's a link to what he said. Okay, a NATO veteran source comments, quote, I suppose the Iranians and Russians would prefer if no one pointed out that not helping an aggressor, targeting one, or the other signals that aggressors need not worry about either coming to the other's aid, unquote. Article 4 and 5 appear to expand the operations of the general staffs and intelligence services of Russia and Iran. For example, Article 5 provides that 1, in order to enhance national security and confront common threats, the intelligence and security agencies of the contracting parties shall exchange information and experience and increase the level of their cooperation. 2, the intelligence and security agencies of the contracting parties shall cooperate within the framework of separate agreements, unquote. The vagueness and ambiguity of the term level of cooperation, quote unquote, may be resolved by the, quote, framework of separate agreements, unquote, but that clearly means the two sides are keeping their arrangements secret. Article 5 displays a similar combination of outer ambiguity and inner secrecy. Article 5, Section 4 looks to be expansive, but it is vague. Quote, the contracting parties shall consult and cooperate in countering common military and security threats of a bilateral and regional nature, unquote. This should extend, for example, to providing target intelligence to the Houthi forces of Yemen against Israel and Israeli-bound or Israeli-connected shipping in the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. Article 5, Section 1 provides the secrecy qualifier, quote, in order to develop military cooperation between their relevant agencies. The connecting parties shall conduct the preparation and implementation of respective agreements from the Working Group on Military Cooperation, unquote. Putin was more comfortable using fight language to agree with Pistachio on combating the U.S.-led sanctions war against them both. Identical language has been used in the new treaty as was used in the Korean one last June. Sanctions termed, quote, unilateral coercive measures, unquote, are dealt with in Article 19 of the new agreement. The two states have explicitly agreed to fight back together. Using the emphatic form of the future term, they, quote, shall counter the application of unilateral coercive measures, unquote. Quote, shall guarantee the non-application of unilateral coercive measures aimed directly or indirectly against either contracting party, unquote, and, quote, shall refrain from acceding to unilateral coercive measures or supporting such measures of any third party if such measures affect or are aimed directly or indirectly against either contracting party, individuals, and legal entities of such contracting party or their property. To fight the sanctions war, Russia and Iran have also agreed that they shall make practical efforts to reduce risks, to eliminate or mitigate the direct and indirect impact of such measures on mutual economic ties, individuals, and legal entities of the contracting party or their property under the jurisdiction of the contracting parties, goods originating from the contracting party and intended for the other contracting parties, and/or works, services, and information. This is not new. In December 2023, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov signed with Hossein Amir Abdullahian, then the Iranian Foreign Minister, what they called, quote, a declaration on the ways and tools of countering, alleviating, and compensating for the negative consequences of unilateral coercive measures. This is important for pooling the efforts of the international community to overcome the illegal sanctions with which the U.S. and its allies have replaced diplomacy. There is a Moscow meeting on sanctions and war fighting between Amir Abdullahian left and Lavrov right on December 5th, 2023. Regarding Iran's vulnerability to Israel, to Israeli nuclear-armed attack, and the countermeasures these draw from Tehran in the new treaty, there's a passing reference to more cooperation, Article 10, which says, the contracting parties shall cooperate closely on arms control, disarmament, non-proliferation, and international security issues in the framework of the relevant international treaties and international organizations to which they are parties, and hold consultations regularly on these matters. The text of the pact provides for other agreements to be negotiated for defense and military purposes. For example, Article 41 provides the contracting parties in order to define specific areas and parameters of cooperation provided for in this treaty may, if necessary, conclude separate agreements. These may remain secret. For those who savor Iranian pistachios, this treaty language is marking out the difference in the shell and the nut. About that, uh, sorry, I lost my thread here. For those who favor Iranian pistachios, this treaty language is marking out the difference between the shell and the nut. About that, in the only Russian comment published so far by Boris Rogin, a leading military analyst in Moscow, the shell is acknowledged, and the secret crux is an irony. The secret protocols on the new partition of Poland were not published, unquote. Rogin has commented. That was a sarcastic comment, I believe, and entered a little humor into the situation. So there are these secret and separate agreements, and what they actually agreed to, we cannot know because they were in the secret and separate agreements. So that's a little disappointing, and I can't see the logic in it if they wanted to order the West off of making attacks on Iran, which might have to involve themselves after all. So if you're going to have to involve yourself anyway, you might as well make it plain from the beginning, so everyone on the other side sees that you're going to intervene. So, but I think that was a very interesting analysis of the Pistachio Pact by John Helmer. So we'll leave that at this point and go back to our comments. So Fryer says, oops, there we go. Doc Trump is already talking about putting U.S. I guess I read that already. Fryer Steve says, airborne units, duck. He said, Doc. Sandy says, hello, shared. Hey, great to see you, Sandy. Steve Wolfron says, hello, Earl, my brother. Great. That's cool. Okay. So do you have any comments on that, on the Pistachio Pact?
Not too much, no.
Oh, you don't want to see presentation versions of carefully roasted pistachios delivered to your doorstep?
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so Sandy says, hi, John, Bonnie, and Dolores Pierce. Thank you, Sandy. Always great to see you. So, you are a good commercial for pistachios, Doc. I want to buy a bag now. I don't sell pistachios, especially Iranian pistachios. Sandy says, it's nutso. Is that what she said? Oh, she say it's nuts too. That's too. Okay, so in West Asia now, we have a lot of unknowns. We don't know what Trump is going to do. We don't know what he really intends.
No.
He hasn't really been showing his hand yet. Yeah, he's been making remarks that later, when he sees what he does, we'll look back and we'll say, oh, that was consistent with this. But then there were other things that he said, which later we would also say, oh, they were consistent with what's happened. we don't really know what is going to happen. I don't think we don't know what his real intentions are. He may not know what his real intentions are yet. He may be playing one of these games where he's talking to a lot of different people and his intentions may change depending on what he hears from them. For example, yeah, it is frightening. He's back in office. For example, if he's talking to Mohammed bin Salman, which I'll bet he is,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to have to gauge what will be necessary to make a deal with the Saudis to normalize their relations with Israel. If he thinks there's a good possibility for normalization, he has to find out on what conditions. Okay. So, but we don't know whether Mohammed bin Salman is going to insist on the condition of a Palestinian state. A number of commentators who said things about this, Scott Ritter's opinion is that, yeah, the Arabs will insist on some kind of fig leaf, basically. Scott didn't use this terminology, but they will insist on some kabuki showing that the Gulf Arabs, and the Saudis in particular, okay, are supporting the Palestinians. But it's the kind of thing where they might provide for a Palestinian state sometime in the future and take that, okay, as a fig leaf. What he's saying is he doesn't think that the Saudis are going to block a deal over whether they're, uh, when it comes to normalization, uh, because the Israelis have not complied, with the requirement of getting in back of the idea of an independent state of Palestine. So Scott doesn't think that Mohammed bin Salman is going to insist on that. I don't know whether he's going to insist on that or not, but I know if he does, then it's going to be necessary for the Israelis to go through with this peace agreement. And we will know as they get to the end of 42 days, we will know whether they intend to just end the peace agreement there or go forward. We may even know beforehand, maybe 2 weeks in or 3 weeks in, because we may start seeing violations of the ceasefire from the Israeli side and Trump doing nothing about those violations. So we may see that. Or we may see some sort of middle situation where his envoy is there and is overlooking the process and is reporting back to Trump on a daily basis. And so Trump is making noises on a daily basis about whether it's looking good or it's looking bad, or the Israelis are looking like stupid idiots, or whatever language Trump wants to use. Uh, we just don't know now what his intentions really are. We can begin to infer them from his words and from his actions as the ceasefire period actually wears on. But
Mm-hmm.
all we really have now are guesses about what he wants to do. So, okay, that's my take. Have you got a take, D?
Well, that's it with Trump. You don't know. We know that he's got that Mr. Whitcock that had, when he had said that the right wing over the right wing, that was a big issue, is the right wing settler groups. Um, with the whole issue of when he talked about with Gaza, and they want to work things out where Palestine is concerned. There are issues within Israel itself that are going to have to be squared away. So this is not something that's a short-term thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So some more comments. There's a comment from Friar Steve who says, I don't think Trump will invest a lot of time and energy into the Asian theater. He's not a very learned man. He has no idea of what's going on in the region. Yeah, there was a sort of funny dialogue between Danny Haiphong, okay, and Pepe Escobar, okay, on their show today, where they're discussing. Uh, there was some remarks that Trump had made. He was basically signing these executive orders and having the press in to witness his signing of the executive orders. And he got to a point where he signed some executive order which was somehow relevant to BRICS or peripherally connected to BRICS. And one of the reporters asked a question about, what Trump was going to do about BRICS. And Trump sort of evaded the question, okay, and says, well, you know what BRICS means, don't you? Okay, and this was in the context of people talking about Spain and what Spain had been doing in relation to the International Criminal Court. And as Trump made his comments, one became aware that he thought that the S in BRICS actually represented Spain, and that Spain was a part, okay, of BRICS,
Mhm.
which of course is absolutely ridiculous. Spain is nowhere near BRICS and has never been anywhere near BRICS. I mean, they're objecting to the genocide on completely different grounds. So it was obvious from that comment that Trump didn't know anything about BRICS.
Right.
So far as Steve, you're right. He has no idea of what's going on in the region. If he doesn't know anything when it comes to BRICS, he's got to be even less learned when it comes to the ASEAN group. It was also shown the other day that Hegseth has no knowledge of ASEAN as well. He doesn't even know what ASEAN stands for. So, yeah, a lot of these people are not very learned.
No.
You can certainly say that. But that's not going to stop them from acting on everything and possibly messing up everything. I mean, they're going to go right ahead and do that because they're all about action and not much thought. Friar Steve says, I still think the Saudis will take over Gaza. Can you see a world where that happens, Doc? Trump wants it off his hands. I can see a world where Trump will try to turn it over to the Egyptians,
Right.
try to persuade, the Egyptians to take over Gaza. But of course, if he does that, then he's going to lose access to that wonderful beachfront property where so many amazing things can be done. Such beautiful things. Trump was talking about that today. What
I know, it made me sick.
Gaza? Yeah, but it wasn't Bibi saying that; it was Trump.
I know, it made me sick when Trump said it too.
Yeah, so they've both been talking to Jared Kushner, I guess. So, yeah, they don't appear to know very much about what's going on in Gaza, what the people are like. And, I mean, they must know about the genocide in Gaza, but I don't think they know too much about it.
Um,
And
I
they
read I
think
read that
about it.
that Trump had said, well, there's not many people left in Gaza.
I know, which is a complete misunderstanding of the situation. There were many people killed in Gaza, Okay, I don't know whether it's 100 or 150,000 or 200,000, but that still leaves 2.1 million people in Gaza.
Yes.
So there's still an awful lot of people in Gaza, and you saw many of those people on the streets in the celebrations over the ceasefire.
Yes.
So Farsi says, I don't think there will ever be an independent state of Palestine, especially an armed one, because it poses a threat to the Arab states around it as much as Israel. Well, maybe that's the way the Arab states actually see it. I'm not so sure it poses a threat because, well, let's take Saudi, for example. Saudi's got about 24 million people, and it's well armed. I don't see that Hamas is a threat to Saudi Arabia. To state that seems very silly to me. I mean, I don't care if Hamas is totally armed. I don't care if it merges with the other Palestinians. At most, it's going to be 7 million people. So, what kind of threat can it pose to Iraq? What kind of threat, can it pose to Egypt? What kind of threat can it pose to Saudi? Doesn't seem to me it can pose any kind of threat to any of them. So I just don't think it's a big threat.
I don't either. I mean, these people are trying to survive.
Yes. For now, they're just trying to survive. In the immediate future, they're no threat.
No, not
Feisty
at all.
says Trump is an irrational actor. He only reacts to money that's put in front of him. Right. And I think when he talks to Mohammed bin Salman, he's got a scheme in mind to make some money. He sees money there. He thinks the IMEC corridor is going to bring him money.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to know what Trump is going to do, just follow the money and see who's paid him the most recently. He'll do whatever they want him to do. I think that's too simple for our Steve. I think if Trump sees a bigger deal in the offing, I mean, he may look at what Adelson can do for him. He might like her promises about, big bucks in 2022 for the Republicans, on 2026 for the Republicans, or 2028 for the Republicans. But if he makes the IMEC deal between Israel, okay, and the Saudis, and they dig a canal going through Israel, okay, to Gaza, uh, and that becomes a new trading route. There's all kinds of dollar signs in that for Trump and Jared Kushner. Okay, and they know that. And I don't think Adelson can dissuade them from following the course they want to follow to make that kind of deal. You're saying just follow the money. I'm saying not only follow the past track of money, but follow the future track of money that Trump envisions. That's very important as well. I think he thinks he can make many, many $billions off the IMEC deal. So there it is. Feisty says Trump heard Spain again and thought Spanish flu. Yes. Yes, Doc, I agree he's going to mess up a lot. Of course he does. Steve says, why not give a try? Well, he already has a try. He's the president, Steve Wolfbrand. So he's going to try. No matter what we do, he's going to try.
Mm-hmm.
It remains to be seen what kind of mess he's going to make. I am hoping he doesn't make a bigger mess than Biden, because Biden made a really big foreign policy mess. I am hopeful that Trump will get us out of nuclear crises with Russia and possible nuclear crises with Israel and Iran. That's what I'm hoping he does. And if he does that, from my point of view, he will have a more successful presidency than Joe Biden. Whatever else bad he does, the United States of America will live to fight, another day. What Biden was doing was going to kill us all. So I'm very glad Biden is out. I'm not glad that Trump is in as opposed to somebody else. But compared to Biden, I'm glad that Trump is in.
Right. And it's just really sad that Kamala Harris, you know, stayed with Biden on things. And I know you know, the donors, that was the big issue was the donors.
Yeah, the donors were the big issue, but the fact that she stayed with Biden for so long is a measure of what a mediocrity she is
Hmm.
and what a weak president she would have been. I mean,
That
if she was presidential timber, she would have cut out Biden at the end of July when she took over. She would have cut him out of everything, even tried to use a 24th Amendment against him.
right. That's what she should have done. If it was really important enough for her, that's what she would have done.
It was important enough for her to take over and show what she could do even before Trump got elected. If she had done that and she had made an opening to the end of the genocide by stopping the flow of weapons to Israel, she would have won that election hands down.
Definitely.
Trump is going to allow TikTok because he thinks he's going to get half of it. Those were his words last night. I know. I agree. Farstein says that's the reason that Bernie was not Harris. Harris needed the donors. Bernie did not. Yeah. Well, Harris thought she needed the donors, but she got a lot of money from the donors to start with. Okay, if she had, cut Biden out, she still would have gotten a lot of donor money because she was running against Trump, and a lot of the donors didn't want Trump to be president. People would have had no choice but to donate to her. She would have had enough money to get her message out. Anyway, uh, okay, we're going on to the final piece. We've read this before about a month or a month and a half ago, but we're going to do it again because I think it's really good advice for what Trump should be doing, and it's appropriate to remind us of this in the midst of the uncertainty about what Trump is going to do and the mess ups he's already made with respect to his cabinet, who the people are in his cabinet. He's already made one big mistake, and that is the new Secretary of State, okay, is Marco Rubio, little Marco.
Yeah, little Marco, that when it comes to what Trump was saying with the birthright citizenship, um, little Marco falls into that because his parents were, from Cuba,
Yep.
and so he's one of the ones that would be deported under Trump's so-called, what he thinks he's going to get, that citizenship, birthright citizenship, which is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to go anywhere either. It's too much. I mean, he has to get an amendment to the Constitution to get that done, I think.
Yeah, so it's not going to go anywhere.
Yes, I don't think so either. Okay, Dee, I have this up. Would you like to read it? It's Iran, America's next war of choice.
Okay.
The U.S. is at risk of being buffaloed into a bloody war of regional realignment in the wake of Syria's collapse. This was written by Douglas McGregor and James W. Clark. Okay, so it's Colonel McGregor. It was originally published on December 17th, 2024, more than a month ago.
Okay. Peace is not at hand in the Middle East, and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu remains determined to expand the war.
I still think that's true, don't you?
Yes, I do. That's what they want to do.
That is what they want to do.
Greater Israel. Syria's de facto partition into Israeli and Turkish territories is the prelude to wider war with Iran. As the Times of Israel reported last week, the Israeli Air Force IAF has, quote, continued to increase its readiness and preparations for, quote, potential strikes in Iran.
But surprise, they didn't go ahead with any such strikes between then and the takeover of the presidency by Trump. They refrained.
Yes.
We're not sure why they refrained. We think one reason for refraining were some of the actions taken by Iran this time to show its readiness to handle any attack by the Israelis. And then there were other things also, like the readiness of the Russians to sign a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran. And then also, maybe they were getting hints from Trump uh, during the interim period that uh, if they struck Iran, that they would not be getting the support of the United States when he took over. So maybe there were hints of that kind, but for some reason, they never completed their plans to strike Iran.
Netanyahu's top priority is the destruction of Iran before Russia wraps up its victory in Ukraine and Syria becomes a new battleground for Turks and Israelis.
Okay,
It's
so from Netanyahu's point of view, they can still accomplish it at this date. In other words, that was his priority on December 17th. But as far as we know, it's also still his priority now.
it's not simply the end of Washington's quote rule-based international order, it's the onset of chaos. Israeli forces and Turkish auxiliaries, the Islamist terrorists who sacked Syria, are already staring at each other across a demarcation line that runs east-west just south of Damascus. Netanyahu harbors no illusions about the conflict between Ankara's long-term strategic aims in the region and Jerusalem's determination to claim the Syrian spoils of war. In addition to serious financial trouble and societal discontent on the home front, President-elect Trump now confronts the dangerous distraction of wars he did not start, wars that will bring his administration and his country no strategic benefit. America's underwriting of Netanyahu's expanding war in the Middle East will endanger U.S. national security and guarantee that Washington, its armed forces, and the U.S. economy will be hostage to whatever strategic direction Netanyahu decides to take.
So that's very important because it's a fact that Trump is facing right now. And I think he knows he's facing that. That was probably part of the motivation why he wanted a ceasefire. He probably thought that a ceasefire process would cool things off some while he thought about what he might do as the crisis intensified. Because if we remember, before he took over, the Israelis were ready to attack Iran. I don't know if they're ready to attack Iran right now. Instead, uh, they're having to go through the process of the ceasefire in Gaza. They have some decision-making space, for attacks in the West Bank, uh, but in Syria, they're no longer in offensive mode. They're just in defensive mode, trying to maintain what they've gained there. Okay, and I don't know what they're doing in Lebanon right now. A few days ago, they were assembling a line of tanks to go into Lebanon again, but there's no news that they did. So, uh, they seem to be in a mode of simply standing still and rethinking what's going on.
Well, I know they want a large military base. They claim they're going to be working on a huge military base in southern Lebanon.
In southern Lebanon, but they can't hold the ground in southern Lebanon.
No, but they don't care.
Well, why wouldn't they care? As soon as the ceasefire is over, which actually it is already, since Hezbollah has started to attack, if they're constructing a huge base in the southern part of Lebanon, that base is going to come under attack by Hezbollah right now.
Right, so they just have things in their mind that eventually this is their thought process is that they're going to control Lebanon. It's going to be part of their greater Israel. They don't live in reality.
Maybe that's why the chief of staff of the IDF simply resigned. I mean, maybe it was because he wanted to live in reality
Hmm.
and nobody else did. But that means Netanyahu has to find a successor who doesn't want to live in reality,
Yeah,
who wants to go along with him. But that successor is not going to be in touch with the IDF itself, because all the reports we're getting that IDF is tired and that people are deserting and that whole units are not reporting for duty. That's what we're hearing.
exactly. That's what we're hearing.
They have no stomach for going back into Gaza once more. And now that they've seen the forces Hamas can use against them, one function of that celebration was to show how many masked people were actually out there and how large the forces were. And something else about it, they reconstituted the government in Gaza as soon as they left. Hamas reconstituted the government within days.
Hmm.
I mean, so they're looking at this. I wonder what they must be thinking. It doesn't look like they accomplished anything there except kill a lot of people and destroy a lot of buildings.
Yeah,
The rebuilding job is going to be huge and big. Okay, there were reports, though, that the Palestinians were already starting to rebuild.
yes.
3 days. So I mean, uh, you know, uh, I don't know what the Israelis should think in that particular situation, but I think they should carefully consider what their next move is going to be, because their military results have been sadly lacking. And when the chief of staff actually resigned, he admitted his failure.
Yeah.
It made him sick. He never expected that kind of failure. Now, it's significant to note that certain military authorities expected that kind of failure. For example, Scott Ritter predicted the failure. Larry Johnson predicted the failure. Colonel McGregor predicted the failure. Colonel Danny Davis predicted the failure. All these people were predicting the failure, saying Israel was going to be beaten up by Hamas, and they would eventually have to leave Gaza. And they made the same predictions with respect to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they still think that. It's looking like they're right. Anyway, going on.
Okay. Starting the war sooner rather than later is critical for Netanyahu. War with Iran presents Trump with a strategic fait accompli in case Trump decides to distance the United States from another bloodbath in the Middle East. Israel's ongoing conflict with Iran and Turkey's potential confrontation with Israel will make disengagement impossible.
So I don't know if Trump has actually thought this through and realizes this point that Doug McGregor is making. But he had McGregor as an advisor in his first administration. Someone on his team now must be observing, what Doug is doing. And maybe they'll recognize this point, which is a very important point for Trump to understand. In other words, he needs to avoid a fait accompli by Israel. He needs to thwart Israel in terms of Israel's getting to that sort of situation with him. I kind of think he knows that. And he actually made the first move, uh, even before he got into office by sending his special envoy there and by forcing Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire. Okay, please go on.
Okay, you can move that down further. American policy plan is need to understand the larger context in which this is all unfolding and why a war on Iran will ultimately bring us and our alleged Israeli friends to grief. The principal aim of U.S. foreign policy planners ought to be the adaptation of the American economy and military establishment to the multipolar world and the development of new markets, not new enemies. Washington's refusal to acknowledge the fundamental shift in power and wealth lie at the heart of much of the Biden administration's foreign policy failure.
Of course, that's absolutely true.
It is. And we
Absolutely true. Biden did not understand that. He and his advisors were deaf, dumb, and blind
completely.
to these changes that have been taking place.
A successful management of change would avoid a conflict with Iran. It would peacefully reconcile competing claims to regional hegemony, as the Chinese recently did with their brokering of the historic rapprochement between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It would revitalize such multicultural organizations as the UN Security Council and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. These actions would cultivate the emergence of new constellations of power along the lines of Metternich and Castlereagh's 1815 Concert of Europe.
Okay, so just to clarify for people who don't know, that the Metternich that they're referring to here was the Austrian foreign minister. Okay, at this point, and Castlereagh, was the foreign minister, of England. Okay, at this point, so in the conferences defining the Concert of Europe, they were two very, very key actors. And really, they defined the outlines of a European peace that, with the exception of the Crimean War, lasted from 1815 to 1914. So, even though their actions in many ways were very reactionary, and were hurtful to people within the individual nations, there was not a lot of war in Europe between 1815 and 1914. It was mostly defined by repression and suppression, okay, of revolutions. Okay, please go on.
Just as no question of strategic security in Europe can be solved without Russian participation, Washington cannot create stability in the Middle East by unconditionally backing Israel's territorial ambitions. And that is exactly what the U.S. does.
Yes, I know. And it's at variance uh, with the underlying structure of power uh, in West Asia. I think Israel is simply too small a state with resources that are too limited to be the dominant power in West Asia. It's just
Mhm.
not feasible. It's not practical. Their desires for expansion to greater Israel. I mean, the countries they would victimize by expanding to greater Israel, if you look at the populations involved, there are 116 million people in Egypt. In Iran, there are 95 million people. In Iraq, something like 35 million people. In Syria, 24 million people. Uh, I probably forgot somebody. Okay. In Saudi, there are 28 million people. Okay, and some of the other Gulf nations, if we put together the people in all the other Gulf nations, there are probably another 85 million people. So those populations, we're looking at something like probably 400 million people, and the Israelis have 7 million people, and they expect to dominate the 400 million, and they have very few internal resources. I mean, this can't be done. It has
No,
to be a situation of repression of everybody in that area by the United States. That's not practical. We only have an army right now of 400,000 people to do this with. Yes, our Air Force is very, very powerful, can destroy a lot of things. But in the end, you need boots on the ground to take over things.
mhm.
And there are no boots on the ground. There are not enough boots on the ground to do that. I mean, this project has to be given up. The project of Greater Israel is just stupid. It flies in the face of reality.
It does. And what they want to do is they want to be um, what hold power in all the regions. You
Yes.
have a Jewish majority. And as you've said, where are you going to find all the Jewish people around the world who would go there?
Yeah, not only that, uh, worldwide, the Jewish community is split. Not everybody is in back of Israel. And secondly, there are not enough Jews in the whole world to do what Israel wants to do.
Right. And also, what they would require ethnic cleansing of these regions.
Yes, and not to use that as a euphemism, that means killing
Yeah,
all kinds of Arabs in these regions. And that just can't be accepted by the world right now. With the
no.
state of civilization the world is in, that will never be accepted. The only result of that is going to be the extermination of the Jewish population in the Middle East. That's going to be the final result if Israel continues to push this.
Yeah, I'm going to continue on. An American failure to manage its own transition to multipolarity will create more chaos and ignite a major war in the Middle East. not to mention a full-blown war with Russia and eventually China, an outlook that prioritizes avoiding conflict, not starting new conflicts, must replace nearly 3 decades of feckless leadership in foreign affairs. New thinking in defense and foreign policy should rank diplomacy and peaceful cooperation first over the use of military power.
So this is Doug's advice to Donald Trump.
hmm
Okay, and remember, he was an advisor to the first administration, okay, of Donald Trump. So he sat in rooms with Donald Trump as well as other people. He advised him. Trump, knows him. And if I know Doug, he always told Trump, okay, the truth. And I think Trump knows a lot of people lie to him all the time. And he probably
hmm
knows that Doug never lied to him.
hmm
But this is definitely addressed to Trump. This was Doug's effort to try to talk some sense into the Trump team.
Bonaparte quipped that in war, truth is the first casualty. Nothing has changed since then. Washington is a veritable fountainhead of lies, feeding an unending stream of false narratives regarding the true character of the jihadist hordes raging across Syria. For our purposes, however, it is important to note the alignment of powers behind the Islamist factions now pillaging and terrorizing Syria. Washington seems blithely oblivious to Syria's destruction and the emergence of joint Israeli-Turkish hegemony across the Near East. The disintegration of Syria does, however, open up a short window of opportunity for Tel Aviv to attack Iran, as the Times of Israel noted, while previously the IAF
Sorry.
would not fly directly over Damascus when carrying out strikes on Iran-linked targets in the capital. It now can. Yeah, so they can fly over Damascus.
Yes. Straight to Iran.
hmm Netanyahu believes he has the wind at his back. Emboldened by the collapse of the Assad regime, he will turn his attention to Lebanon, southern Syria, and the West Bank.
Before you go on, okay, I do want to make the comment. Even though the Israelis, okay, and the Americans can fly directly now over Damascus to attack Iran, the time it takes to get the planes to Iran is far more than the time it takes the Iranian hypersonic missiles to get to Israel
Hmm.
and to get to the American bases and to get to the aircraft carriers, okay, in the area. Those hypersonic missiles are awfully fast. And as soon as the Iranians get warning from the Russians that an attack is at hand, those hypersonic missiles, okay, are going to be fired. And the air bases that were used by the Israelis, okay, and the Americans will be destroyed by those missiles. And the planes will have nowhere to come back to.
That's a fact. Okay.
Okay, you're at one predictable consequence.
Yes, one predictable consequence of an attack on Iran will be a solidifying of the Chinese brokered Iran-Saudi rapprochement and a hardening of the blocs in the greater Middle East, which I will see Iran, backed by Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, set against a temporary Israel-Turkish bloc backed by Washington and its European vassals. Iran is not Iraq. At 90 million people, it is double Iraq's population.
More than
And
it's
yes,
3 times Iraq's population.
and has more developed economy and has more powerful allies than Saddam Hussein ever did. Contrary to neoconservative expectations, there are no cakewalks in the greater Middle East. The only certainty amid the chaos is that, thanks to the connivance of Biden, Netanyahu, and Erdogan, a wider war in the greater Middle East is only just beginning. It is one we will come to regret.
But Trump can pull us out of it if he follows the advice he got from Doug McGregor here.
Yeah,
He really needs to follow that advice. He really needs to understand what he has to do in the foreign policy area. Now, he seems to have a glimmering of that because his people and he seem to be saying they want to shift the focus of attention to the Western Hemisphere. This is something that Doug advised in the other article we went over a couple of streams ago. Basically, Doug is advocating that we accept our position as a regional power here in the Western Hemisphere and that we retreat our military forces, for other areas of the world. That this is only sensible given the actual military resources that we have. We can no longer be the hegemon. We can be a major regional power, in this hemisphere. And so that's the way our foreign policy should be oriented. As far as other regions of the world are concerned, we should cooperate with the other great powers and collaborate with them to keep the peace. One of the things I think that Trump has to learn is he has to learn about what BRICS is doing.
yes.
He has to get a knowledge base about BRICS. Oh, come on, Friar Steve. I mean, come on. Here's the Friar Steve. Friar Steve says stock. I agree with you. Who is stock? I don't understand that. Friar Steve says the final piece. Friar Steve is not a big fan of Rubio, but at least he knows basic history of geopolitics. I don't think he knows basic history of geopolitics. I didn't hear that from him. I don't think he knows what's been going on in Europe. Friar Steve's birthright citizenship, wouldn't that be Barron Trump?
Yeah. I don't know if she was a citizen or if she, at the time when Barron was born.
Oh, certainly Trump was a citizen.
Yes.
Okay, and Barron was born here. So he did have birthright citizenship, right? Yeah, Barron Trump had birthright citizenship. I don't know if his mother was a citizen by then.
That's what I was just. I don't know if she was a citizen yet,
Yeah,
but definitely his father
his
was a
father was a citizen, yes. Farsi says if the U.S. is to go to war with Iran, The only goal should be to liberate the Kurdistan region. Well, okay, I like the Kurds. Okay, I really do. But I don't know if trying to create uh, a nation of Kurdistan with 40 million people in it is worth the bloodshed to all, okay, that might be involved in that. Frosty says, I'll keep saying it, Trump wants to be a war president. He will start his own war. I don't think he wants to be a war president. I think he wants to be a president who does business and who gets himself even richer. And he's set up the situation that basically he can make deals where he loots. And as long as he's acting as the president of the United States, he has full immunity from the Supreme Court. He's in the perfect situation to violate the Constitution all he wants and to make himself as rich as he wants, to be thoroughly corrupt, to make private deals in his capacity as president, to make deals that favor Jared Kushner and his daughter. I mean, the Supreme Court has liberated him to be thoroughly corrupt. It's insanity. Frosty says Trump spent his last administration trying to start a war of his own, wars of his own in Qatar, Iran, Venezuela. Trump will leave us. I'm not sure I understand the words here. In a war, he did more drone strikes for the war on terror than any other president. I don't think Trump wants. I'll be specific. I don't think Trump wants a war with Russia or China. He may not want a war with Iran right now either. Now, he may pick on smaller countries, more defenseless countries. He may pick on Venezuela as part of a campaign to subdue the South Americans and create a situation where the United States is once again dominating South America. All these things he may do, but I don't think he's going to start a war with Russia and China. Feisty says, I can find nothing about Israeli military base in southern Lebanon. Do you have any sources for that? I think what Dee said is that the Israelis are trying to build a gigantic military base in the southern part, of Lebanon. I don't think she says they have it built yet.
No, they don't have it built yet, but that's what the intention. The intention is, and you see all the bulldozers and everything else. People particularly were questioning why all the bulldozing and all the activity going on.
Price Steve says UNIL is only KNSL. I think he's referring to the southern part of Lebanon there and saying the UN international peacekeepers are only in the southern part of Lebanon. Doc, you don't think that what Israel is trying to do is equivalent to what Great Britain did for hundreds of years? Right, but the reason why Great Britain could do that for hundreds of years is that Great Britain was facing backward nations that weren't actually really nations. In many instances, Great Britain was facing tribal forces, and it could play off one tribe against another, which it did very, very successfully. in various parts of Africa, it wasn't facing nationalism and other nations. This is an entirely different situation. Uh, I think the nations that exist now are too nationalistic to allow Israel to completely dominate them. I think the Arabs are too nationalistic to allow that. Doc, it's been done before. Just check the history of Great Britain. Yeah, and it's been done before by the Roman Empire and the Romans. Uh, Doc, we have a volunteer army of 500,000 with the draft. We will have an army of 2 million if we need to. Well, I mean, that sounds easy, but the Russian army of 1.5 million that it is pulling in place now is being put in place largely by volunteers. Also, we don't have a volunteer army of 500,000 right now. We have a volunteer army of only 400,000. We don't know whether it will be possible to introduce a draft right now. That is, we don't know whether young people would sit still for a draft. Friar Steve says we have reservists in National Guard too, Doc. We do, but there are not many of those. The Army is a small force. There are probably more people in the Air Force right now than there are in the Army. I mean, altogether, Navy, Army, and Air Force, including the Marines, we probably have only about 1.5 million people in all three services, all three major services. Doc, the first time an Iranian hypersonic missile hits the U.S. warship, we will nuke Iran. No, we won't. We're not going to nuke Iran. I mean, that's not going to happen. We're looking at a situation where the Houthis might well have sunk the USS Harry Truman. We didn't talk about sending nukes to knock out the Houthis. If we nuke Iran, we resist Russian retaliation. They may not even have to go nuclear. They'll send Oreshniks. God. Every U.S. commander warns that a war with Iran is not desirable. We will not put boots on the ground except in the Kurdish region to help them. And we won't put too many troops on the ground there either.
No.
I mean, what do we got there? 9,000 right now. In the war with Iran, the bombing campaign will be horrifying. Doc, Trump wants a war with Iran. I'll keep saying it till you finally realize it. You can keep saying it. He's been saying it since his last administration. But he hasn't done it. He didn't do it in his last administration. And he doesn't appear to favor one now.
The only reason he says things is for his base, and he has all these people, you know, we hear them, the Marco Rubio and all these other group people saying, "Oh, Iran, Iran, Iran." They're pushing it.
Friar Steve says, yes, Doc, he will loot. I agree with you on that. Friar Steve says, I agree. He doesn't want war with Russia. I wonder what will happen with Taiwan and China. Well, I think, first of all, he has to learn things. He spent 4 years basically playing politics. He didn't spend 4 years learning about the rest of the world. Certainly not learning about what China has done. I don't think he has a realistic view of China and Chinese capabilities. And I think as he gets briefed on that, he will realize we don't have a chance in fighting China. And I don't think he's going to initiate a war with them. I think he's finally going to see the wisdom of retreating to the Western Hemisphere. By the way, Doc, the draft has already been approved by the Obama administration. I'm not talking about the government approving the draft. That's not what I'm saying. A draft will not be successful if people will not register for it. It will not be successful if people won't report. No one here sees the need for a draft right now. They don't see the threat from Iran as serious enough to warrant a draft. They don't see the threat from China as serious enough to warrant a draft. They don't see the threat from Russia as serious enough to warrant a draft. You could have a draft in the First World War and the Second World War because wars had been raging in Europe in the First World War for a long time, and there had been a lot of anti war propaganda for years against the Germans. And so we did introduce conscription in that war, and it was accepted enough for us to send hundreds of thousands of troops over to Europe and to turn the tide there. But even so, we didn't send the kind of people over to Europe we did in the Second World War, in that World War. In that World War, the draft was approved by people because there were obvious threats to the United States posed by Japan and Germany. And Roosevelt could use those threats to call for a draft and to have a successful draft. He also built an extreme amount of popular capital that he had built up during the Depression. All these things supported a draft. But right now, we've gotten away from a draft, very far away from having a draft in this country. And people do not want one. They don't want to send their sons to die in Iran or die fighting China or die fighting Russia. None of these powers seem to be sufficiently aggressive to warrant a draft because they're not an existential threat, to the United States. Doc, he was stopped during his last administration from a war with Iran. Nothing can stop him this time. I think Putin can stop him.
And the thing is, you have, what's his name? Red-faced from Georgia. Lindsey Graham, not from Georgia.
He's from South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina. Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is always talking about. He wants to bomb everybody.
Yeah. Right. He wants to bomb everybody. But Trump will realize as he gets into the situation, that Iran is a nation of 95 million people and that they have hypersonic missiles. We don't have a defense against them, that they are powerful and that they're backed by Russia and China, both of them. And Trump doesn't want a war with Russia and China, certainly not with both Russia and China. Now, of course, there's some question as to whether they would go to war, over Iran. But certainly, if we nuked Iran, they would go to war over that. If we attacked Iran with conventional forces, I think Russia would give Iran a great amount of help, including shipping them Oreshniks to use against us. Fry says, remember Pearl Harbor, America is at heart a war nation for the past 200 years. When Americans see American blood spilled, everything changes. Oh, yeah? How did Americans, um, how did we react when the Israelis attacked the USS Liberty in 1967? They spilled, okay, a lot of American blood there, and the administration was able to sweep it under the rug. And the Israelis have never paid a price for that attack on an American ship,
Mm-hmm.
doing nothing except observing what was going on. This is not like an attack on our homeland that you're talking about. In other words, if American blood is spilled in the Middle East, it will be spilled because our forces were attacking Iran. It won't be because of an aggressive attack by the Iranians against us. Now, they may make an aggressive attack, against Israel. And I'm not saying that it would be an aggression, technically speaking, because the Iranians have already been attacked by Israel, and Israel has the right to retaliate for that attack. I'm sorry, the Iranians have the right to retaliate for that attack, and they have never done so. If they retaliated now, I think they could get away with it. If the Americans choose to join the Israelis, well, that case will have to be made, to the American people, whether it's worth it for American blood to be spilled for the protection of Israel. I mean, I know Israel is loved in the Congress and that all these people happen to be bought, but I don't think the American people at large, okay, are bought. And the recognition that Israel is committing a genocide has been seeping through to the American people over some period of time now. And especially, it's been leaking through to the young people here who would have to fight such a war. They will not go willingly. Sinking American ships will not go well with the American public. It won't go well, but if the Americans attack them first, what are they supposed to do? If they join the Israelis in an attack, what is Iran supposed to do except to defend itself? If that involves, sinking American ships, they're going to sink American ships. We're getting a lot of damage done to our ships now by the Houthis. It isn't creating hysteria here that we have to go and annihilate the Houthis. I mean, we're doing our best anyway in that respect and totally unsuccessful. I don't know why you think we'd be any more successful in getting the Iranians. Anyway,
And this is all because, of uh, their belief with Israel wanting to have, pretty much Israel be like a military base. They look at Israel as this powerhouse.
yeah, they look at Israel as this aircraft carrier, but it's no longer a powerhouse. Its economy is in ruins. Its army has suffered very heavy casualties. A lot of equipment has been lost. Uh, I don't think Israel is a powerhouse right now compared to Iran.
It's not.
I don't think it's a powerhouse compared to the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance is beating it at every turn.
And look at everything when it comes to Israel. Look at what all the U.S. lives that were lost because of going into Iraq and all that happened in Iraq. And you look at Afghanistan, just look at everything in the Middle East and all the American lives that have been lost and people's, mental issues afterwards and just so many, injuries and all because of this concept of, standing with Israel.
Yeah, I agree with Aristides that sinking American ships will not go well with the American public. But I think the context of any attack on American ships, okay, is critical. If the attack on American ships comes because the aircraft carriers, okay, are assisting the Israelis in an aggressive attack on Iran, I don't think the American public is going to be so ready to go to war then. And that's true even if two or three of the aircraft carriers are sunk.
Hmm.
After all, if they engage in war, they have to expect to be sunk.
That's true, and that's a risk.
Some people are going to tell the truth about that. They're going to point out the aircraft carriers were not simply defending themselves when they were sunk, that they were attacking the Iranians. And the Iranians sunk them in retaliation. So does that make the Iranians evil? I don't think so. I know the propaganda campaign is going to be fierce, but I think in this instance the truth is going to out, and they will find it difficult to get people to rise to a war against the Iranians. Uh, and by the way, if our aircraft carriers are sunk, how the hell are we going to prosecute a war against the Iranians? I mean, what exactly is the scenario here? If our forces join the Israelis, okay, in attacking Iran, okay, and they attack by destroying the Israeli air bases and a large part of the infrastructure of Israel, and they destroy our 68 bases, in the Middle East, and they destroy our carriers, okay, inside of the
Hmm.
Middle East, and we're thirsting for revenge, and we
Hmm.
want to declare war, on Iran, and we do declare war, okay, on Iran. What exactly are we going to do to Iran at that point? In order to win, we have to go over there and we have to fight Iran with boots on the ground. The U.S. probably unite with anger and prejudice against any nation that attacks the sinks, okay, U.S. naval character. No, I remember Pearl Harbor very well. Well, even though I was only I was only two and a half.
Hmm.
I was almost three when Pearl Harbor came around. But okay, the point being that Pearl Harbor looked like an aggressive attack by the Japanese, on the United States. But the Iranian attack on American bases will look like we are. Uh, it would look like we are attacking Iran first, and what they were doing was defending themselves. Fryer says, Doc, we will send the B-1 bombers. Okay, so we will send some of the B-1 bombers. Okay, and you think there won't be attacks on, Diego Garcia? I mean, you really think they're not going to resist if we send B-1 bombers? What's the mileage between Iran, targets in Iran, and, Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean? We can find out, but I'll bet some of the Iranian missiles can get there, and Russian missiles can certainly get there. Mr. Sarmat can certainly get there. Okay, by the way, we seem to think that, Diego Garcia is some place that can't be attacked. But I think it can be attacked, and that those bombers are vulnerable. We can do in-air refueling. I know we can do in-air refueling. I mean, so what? I mean, what's your point? Those bombers can reach Iran. I don't have any doubt about that. But they're going to have to contend with the air defense systems. And they're going to have to defend with supersonic fighters. I don't think it's going to be easy. If we use nukes, other nations are going to use nukes against us. If there's any chance, that we're going to use nukes, then the Iranians will get nukes of their own in a very short time. If Russians get involved, it is the only green light the U.S. will need to take all of Ukraine to NATO. Oh, come on. Come on, Friar Steve. You've been watching the war, in Ukraine. How successful has NATO been? Where are the NATO armaments that are going to take the whole of Ukraine? They don't exist. Where are the factories that are going to produce those armaments? They don't exist. Where are the attacks on Siberia going to come from? Come on. This is not going to happen. Don't you understand the Ukrainians are getting slaughtered in Ukraine? Don't you understand they have 1 million fatalities? Shock and awe round two over Iran. Iran is not like Iraq. Shock and awe is not going to work. The air defense systems in Iran are too strong already and getting stronger by the month as the Russians ship them the S-400s.
And the Iranians want to live peacefully. They've got this trade going, the agreements with BRICS, Russia. They don't want war. They want diplomacy.
Yes, but they are willing to fight a war to stop the genocide in Gaza.
Yes, they are.
That they are.
So the problem in the region is Israel.
Friar Steve, if you believe that Russia has lost 1 million soldiers fighting in Ukraine, and that Trump is telling the truth and mentioning it himself, then I have a bridge to sell you. I have a bridge to sell you. All intelligent observers of that war know very well that the ratio of losses is 8 to 10 million in favor of the Russians. For every one Russian fatality, there are 8 Ukrainian fatalities in that war. I mean, that is common knowledge, except here in America, because we accept our own separate propaganda. I mean, why do you think the Ukrainians are collapsing if they've only lost 700,000 and the Russians on their side have lost 1 million? There's no evidence that the Russians have had those kinds of casualties. Further, when they got into Ukraine, they only marched in with 90,000 troops. They've built up their force there to 1.5 million. We know, based on their recruitment, they have not recruited enough to lose 1 million troops. If Iranian air defense is so strong, then Israel and the U.S. should not be able to bomb their nuclear sites. Let's see what happened. Well, Israel and the U.S. so far have not been able to bomb their nuclear sites. In other words, the sites they hit, and I guess the place is called Parchin or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That site was abandoned years ago. Okay, the attack on October 26th did not damage any of the nuclear sites of Iran. Send me the blueprints for that bridge. What bridge? What are you talking about? Oh, he's talking about the Brooklyn Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Russians, oh, that's bullshit, Friar Steve. Russians are losing 1,000 soldiers a day. The Ukrainians are losing 1,000 soldiers a day. It was mentioned in Russian media. I don't know what media you're talking about, but
I don't know either.
it is not true. There are people on Telegram who are watching the losses on a daily basis and carefully keeping track. And they all agree that it's the Ukrainians who are losing 1,000 soldiers a day. The Russians are losing only a fraction of that. That is why the war is still popular in Russia. Anyway, Dee, I think it's time for us to go.
I think so too.
I think Friar Steve is just living in a world of facts which is divorced from our own. But I
Mm-hmm.
will tell you this, Friar Steve. As the conflict in Ukraine goes further, we will see that what we've been telling you about casualties is correct. When the Ukrainians collapse and the Russians take over, okay, entirely, the truth is going to out. Well, okay, you can send me whatever you would like, but there's a whole group of people with access to what is going on in Russia day by day, with access to satellite images, with access to study of graveyards and stuff like that, who are coming up with estimates totally at variance to what you are mentioning. The
Mm-hmm.
kinds of estimates that you are mentioning are coming out of U.S. propaganda organs and Ukrainian propaganda organs. They are not telling you the truth, and you are believing it. Well, I will say that he's telling me, you will see, Doc, and that's what I have to say too, Friar Steve. You will see, Friar Steve. So, on that note, let us say good night.
Good night, everybody. Tomorrow, actually, I'm going to be driving to New Jersey to see Madeline Hoffman.
Okay. So,
So,
you have a show tomorrow night?
most likely not.
Okay. Okay. I will be back on Thursday from my show at 8 o'clock.
Mm.
Okay. Are you having a show on Thursday?
Um, Let me think. Why don't you just take the time? I'm going to be spending time with Madeline.
Okay. So, I'll be back at 9 on Thursday as well, instead of 8 on
Yeah.
Thursday. Oh, so Friar Steve doesn't believe what RT says?
You could believe what you want, Friar Steve.
No, it is not my only source. Okay, Sandy, thank you for coming. Sandy says, have a good night, Joe, Bonnie, Dee, Steve, and everyone.
Yeah, good night, Sandy. It was good seeing you here tonight.
Okay, good night, Friar Steve.
Yeah, good night, Friar Steve.
Talk
It's
to you.
good having everybody here.
Hey, what nights are you on, Joe? My regular times are Tuesday and Saturday at 9 p.m., And on Thursday nights, I usually come on at 8 p.m. But as Dee and I were just saying, this week I'm going to take Thursday night at 9. So I will have that spot. So I will be at 9 on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Sandy. Okay, sometimes I come on other days also because Dee is having a show and I'm joining her for that show.
Yes, and last week we covered a lot, or you had a lot of information you wanted to get out. So,
Yeah, I
I
did.
went live and Joe was with me and that we could, get the information out.
Yes, we did. And we're likely to have days like that again as time goes by, because I think Trump is going to be very active at first in his administration with respect to foreign policy. And there's going to be a lot of stuff to cover.
Yes.
Sandy says, nice seeing you again. Wonderful seeing you, Sandy.
Yes, it was wonderful seeing Sandy.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Take care, everybody. Good night.
Yeah, good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, good night, Dee.
Yeah, good night. Take care.
Okay, I'm going to end the stream.